Fadeaway82 coming at you with another edition of Rust Cribs, in which we take a look at some base designs during the past wipe cycle on the US Rustopia server. Rustopia is a vanilla Rust server with a 1-week wipe cycle, which means every week players get to do it all over again, creating new base designs. So if you're playing on a Rust server that has a 1-week wipe cycle and it's a vanilla Rust server, things should look pretty similar to what you're seeing here. If you're playing on a modded server or a vanilla Rust server with a greater than 1-week wipe cycle, things might look a little bit different. Starting us off here, we have an absolutely badass base design by Dirt McGirt, utilizing one of the new rocks with the new procedurally generated terrain in Rust. Rock bases have always been a contentious point in the Rust community, but I've always been fascinated with rock-based designs. I like the aesthetic of integrating bases with the existing landscape, incorporating some of the added benefits and security of the terrain. Of course, people will say you can just shoot it out of the sky with rockets, and of course they're right, but any base can be blown up with enough rockets and C4, so that really doesn't mean too much. Rock bases like this will give you added protection from hand tools and melee weapons. It gives you also some added protection from campers at your front door. It's much harder to camp a rock formation with limited footing than it is to camp the ground. The rock, due to its natural height, will give you a greater vantage point. And if you notice here, DMG was able to place a high exterior stone gateway on that rock, which makes this rock formation a little more desirable than perhaps some of the other ones. This rock formation also has a very specific shape to it, which makes it a little more difficult to raid. When you're building out a rock, you have to be very careful and mindful of the building privilege around the rock, so just keep that in mind so someone doesn't ladder up your rock. Now we're moving over and taking a look at CML's base design. CML is a group on Rustopia that builds quickly and feverishly after a start of a wipe cycle, and they're a very regimented and disciplined group. They are willing to take on new members. They do have a process whereby you can be a worker or a slave, as they're referred to in Rust. And the best part is they don't have a drug testing policy because their clan leader's name is Big Pothead. So looking at their base design during the past wipe cycle, this, like a typical CML base design, has various areas for different functions here. So members have areas to congregate when they're crafting, they have places to go to put their artwork together, and places to gather socially. CML is a very interesting group in that they foster a sense of community with themselves and the larger server. So they build places like arenas, slave pits, and they have ways of interacting with the community that's not as self-serving as a lot of groups in Rust, and they really bring just an added sense of community to it, and it's a really good case in point of what you can do with Rust, and that there's more to it than PvP. If you spend time in the CML compound, you'll likely have a good time. So taking a look at their inner compound here, notice these towers. I'm not sure if during this footage, if this was a live raid, or if it was the members just doing some type of a defensive maneuver to test their own defenses. But what you're seeing here is these two towers creating crossfire in that courtyard between the two towers, which is something that's going to give them a lot of security if that inner courtyard gets breached by raiders. Again, notice here that every building has a particular function. That was a furnace shack that we just saw with both outside and inside furnaces. And this is the slave pit. This is a way if you want to get in with CML, you'll start off as a slave or a worker. This is a very ominous place to be. The artwork was done here by a member named Buggy, which we'll take a closer look at in a moment. And it's a very well done art, but very disturbing at the same time. It left me with lingering mental images, and I felt like it was a bad acid trip while I was here. So this area is called the Hive, and these doors symbolize places that the higher ranking slaves can live. If you're not high enough up on the hierarchy, you will have to live on the dirt floor underneath the foundations, with again constant reminders of your status in the grand scheme of things. Looking back up at those penthouse suites, these slaves are a step up from the dirt floor, but they don't have much privacy because windows are open and looking at them at any point in time, which means the main members from CML can come over there to supervise the slaves, inspect their bodies to make sure that they're not stealing any resources from the group. So there's lots of safeguards and systems put in place, which again is a really strong point of CML. Looking at Buggies House here, more of that artwork continues here. That is wonderful artwork, but again, has a bit of an ominous overtone to it, and it's somewhat disturbing at the same time. So this, guys, again, is just a depiction of what community in Rust looks like when you're part of a larger group, and it's really a fun time. When you're building these bases, you oftentimes will be interacting a lot with your group members, so when you're creating these large-scale compounds, lots of fun stories are had, and it's hard to really tell those stories, but if you're a Rust player, I'm sure you'll have many of them yourself. So panning out here and looking at the compound, just take note of how CML took over not only their main compound, but also parts of the exterior as well by putting up bridges in various places that extend out into the landscape. Now we're moving on over and taking a look at the main DMG group's compound. The first base we took a look at was Dirt's solo base project on that rock, but this is a cave base put together by the larger group, with TM and Dirt's group being the mastermind behind it. It is a very well constructed base. We can't show too many of the secrets inside, but we'll show off what we were allowed to. Look at the footprint of the base though outside of the cave itself, and it's massive in its own right. So without even considering the cave system underneath that base is going to be a bitch of a one to raid. Looking at inside of the cave base, you can see that TM was able to maneuver a high exterior stone gateway in there and also place pumpkins. The loot rooms in there, guys, are very, very secure. You would need a lot of rockets and C4 to even breach one of the main loot rooms because of the depth of the cave and then the complexity of the outer exterior base. Taking a look at some visitors from South Korea who have been playing on Rustopia during the past few wipe cycles. It's been great having them on the server, and it's been really interesting studying their base designs. I've been interested to see if there's any difference between a base design from people from a different culture than most of the European base designs, I guess you could say, that we're seeing on most of the Rust Crib series. So I don't really notice any difference necessarily. They do seem to have more of an aesthetic touch to building the base, and it's a little more uniform looking than some of the American bases. A little bit less honeycomb going on, but still a very effective base. They manage their building privilege wisely. They're a very effective group. The only issue that seems to be posed with people from different time zones playing is there's a disproportionate amount of people sometimes on the server when it's their peak time versus the server peak time. So that has some added difficulties to it, but it's been a lot of fun having them on the server. If anyone can decipher any of the signs that are here, please let me know. I don't know what they say, but I'd be interested in hearing any feedback on that. Moving on over, I'm not absolutely sure that these bases are from the same group, but I believe that they are because they're very similar in their form and function. And taking a look here, notice that they're using the building cupboards, the building cabinets, all around the landscape here. These are the triangles and squares that you see. They house building cupboards. So this is going to give you a building radius around your base if you're not familiar with it, where you have the ability to be somewhat safe from other people building in your zone. It's a little bit of a force field type scenario. So it breaks immersion a little bit, but that is the current building mechanics in Rust. So if you're wondering what those are, that's what they are. I really like this base design. This had a Hive type design to it as well, where you can see from looking at the center of the base here, which is hollowed out, there are different doors which lead in different areas of the base, and that makes it very confusing for raiders if they get inside. They don't really know where to go. It also makes so it rains inside the base, which integrates the environment with the base, and that's something that's just aesthetically pleasing and doesn't give you added security, but it's a lot of fun. That was a fun base to take a look at. Alright guys, we're going to let Casey Mo from the Rusty Pirates take us home.
Thanks, Fado. Alright boys, let's take a look here. So looking at this compound, they have a nice group of buildings here. First thing that catches my eye is my Relentless fortress design. It's pretty cool seeing you guys build these designs I put out for you. Looking back inside the compound, you guys didn't notice the lone base inside the walls is actually a cave base. They were able to fit a high external stone wall on the side entrance, which is super helpful during an online raid, but it does leave them a little bit open for an offline raid. It looks like we might have caught these guys mid-fight, but the defenders seem to be holding the attackers off. You see that these guys use standard metal and stone foundations and walls, which forces the raiders into using explosives to get in. Alright guys, let's go take a look at the next one. This is a great compound right here, constructed by the BHG clan. Whenever someone asks me what kind of base they should build, I always tell them not to worry about the base itself, but to worry about the compound as a whole, and the defenses. These guys obviously had that in mind when building this compound. It looks like we might have some intruders trying to bust their way in through one of these buildings here. I'm not sure if the defenders are offline, but they don't seem to be fighting back at the moment. Notice the amount of buildings within this compound. There are 3 almost identical bases, which makes it super hard for the raider to decide which one to hit. Raiders might have enough to raid one, but it's highly unlikely they'd have enough to raid all 3. Take a look at the towers on the outside of the compound. It's way easier to defend a raid shooting the raiders in the back when they're trying to push forward than defending a raid from inside the compound. These towers look like they might still be under construction, but they're using doors, which makes it far easier to shoot down at someone inside your compound. Make sure you guys hit up Fado with some love if you guys liked the video. This has been Casey Mo with Rusty Pirate Gaming and Fado82. Peace.